Good morning. This light you see on my hair is the dawn of a new day, which has been the slogan of the neo-communists for pretty close to a century. I've had a conspiracy channel for the last 8 years. I've been doing research into history for the last 65 years. There's a book called 1984, which is written in 1932, released in 1933, about a future where the populace is controlled by the news, which is controlled by the party. And in that world, the Europeans are fighting against Eurasia, which is basically communism, and Russia, and East Asia, which is China. And what they're fighting over is control of Africa, the resources of the continent of Africa, which is basically what's going on now. So we've managed to hold it back about 40 years, but that's what's occurring. I want to roll this back. I majored in history in university. I just saw an episode of Miami Vice where at the very end the corrupt government G-man says to the cops, "Haven't you noticed real estate's turning red all over the map?" Meaning communist China and North Korea, large parts of South America. That was, I guess, 2007, that was out. The problem with communism is twofold. Communism can never make any money, so they have to steal from the people or from the countries around them, which is what Russia keeps doing. And the tragedy of communism is communism started in the Soviet Union or Russia, and from there went on to infect China and blah, blah, blah. The communism in Russia was imported there after it was exported from England in the form of a blacked-out train with Lenin in it to infect that country with communism. And why that was done is the British Empire saw the gigantic potential of Russia being so huge with so many oil, gas, gold, you name it, resources, land, that they tried to do a preemptive strike against it becoming an economic power. So they promoted communism into it. And the reason the British Empire did that is the British Empire was the militaristic arm of the Vatican, which is the old Roman Empire. So at the behest of the Vatican, the British Isles went out and conquered the world. The sun never sets on the British Empire. And Rome was done at the behest of Egypt. The people who got kicked out of Egypt. I don't know who kicked them out, but Ra, everyone knows that name, the sun god, the god-man, was in control of Egypt and then subsequently disappeared. And that money was split into two parts. There's someone called Dr. Robert Morningstar, and his video is still up on YouTube. He got his degree by explaining this, that when Ra was kicked out of Egypt, he took his money, or they took the money and split it into two. Now, Ra means Ra, Ka means of or owned by, and the money was split up between the Ra Ka Fel, which is fellowship, which is the family, so you get the Rockefellers, and the Ra Ka Shield, which is Shields, which was the army, the loyal followers, where you get the Rothschilds, and all that Egyptian money left there, and with the help of things like the Knights of Malta, was brought to Europe, and I don't know where. I think it's ensconced in Switzerland. So we're still under the thumb of Egypt. If you take a good look at Mr. Obama's skull, and you look at the skulls of the pharaohs, it's the same skull. He's a descendant or scion of Egypt, and these people, behind the scenes people, use half-breed bastards to do their work. And there's who is his real father? Bill Clinton, who was Bill Clinton's father? Justin Trudeau, who is his father? Is it Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Castro? And many other figures who are in trade. Hitler also was a half-breed New World Order bastard. Who is his father? We're not quite sure. This is a thing that goes on. We never see the real players. So now in 2022 we have this pseudo war, which is more of an economic war, it's turning out. The problem for Russia is they don't have a warm water port. They have all those resources, and they don't have a warm water port. When I was a boy, Russia invaded the same area, Donbass, Crimea, to get access to the warm water ports so they could sell their oil around the world. And they're too cheap to just lease the space for a pipeline. So they have to go in with tanks, as they did in the 60s. And tanks, as they are doing today as I speak. And they went into Afghanistan, same thing. They went after the oil there, the oil pipelines. And they failed in Afghanistan. And that's because of the character of the Afghan people. I have a friend who's an Afghan, and his mental toughness is off the scale. And if you remember one of the Rambo movies that was filmed supposedly in Afghanistan, the Afghans said, we've never been conquered, not even by Alexander the Great. And Rambo says, why is that? And the guy said, because we don't take shit from anybody. So the Russians had to give up on that. The Americans were in there trying to do something. They gave up on that. The British left there as well. When the British left, they took every scrap of metal and chewed it up in a machine and sold it for scrap, even though they cut the wires up. They even took, there's a manual for dismantling the Hammond organ in the chapel and how to turn it into scrap metal. So I say ha 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 to communism, because they tell you it's the dawn of a new day and your mandate is to usher in the utopia. And if you look at the world around, there is no utopia in any communist country. There's nothing but misery. starvation, poverty, and at the top, people with limos and $1,000 a bottle liquors and the $2,000 a night hookers. Cocaine. This is not communism. This is oligarchs, thugs, like people when they show a movie where they're going to Russia after something and they run into the drug lord oligarchs. So we need a moral house cleaning, which is not going to happen from external forces. And I've seen the situation, and even an external force could not clean this up. It's going to be a societal change, which, as I majored in history, this will not happen. I was digging into what can I do to solve this problem, and the answer was start a religion. I am not starting a religion and having people in the future chop off other people's heads in my name like they do for Jesus and Mohammed. This is based on a spiritual science reality which is called the law of three. And for any phenomenon, you need three forces. And these are called active, passive, and neutralizing. And in the arena of government of a country, and a country is a creature which is the length and breadth of the land and about 6 foot 6 high, which is where the people are standing on the earth. You would need to have the active force of a philosophy, a civilizing philosophy, acting on the passive force of the populace in the presence of the third force, which would be a religion. Which is what Jesus did. He came in and the active force of the Roman Empire acting on the passive force of the countries they conquered, and he added the philosophy that he had. In the presence of that, there were major changes, and now instead of an apparent barbarism may contain sarcasm, we had civilization based on the philosophy of Jesus and the disciples, saying we could have a different kind of world. So we have Holy Russia, Greece, the British and their empire, Canada, United States, Mexico, Australia is mostly Christian-ish. There are pockets of Christianity all over the world. And that train of thought is why they want to eliminate the Catholics, because they have that book that has the philosophy in it. So, now we have World War III in quotation marks, and Russia's threatening to use nukes, etc., etc. The problem with nuclear bombs is the radiation lasts for 2,500 years afterwards, and pokes holes in the DNA and makes modifications to the DNA. And the nuclear clouds will darken the skies for 2 to 10 years, which will kill the food crops, and then the animals will all die, and then we'll all die. So, in that sense, luckily, we're painted into a corner. So I follow this quite closely, and just lately, the Russians and the Ukrainians, without actually sitting at the same table, signed an agreement that the Russians will let all the foodstuffs leave Ukraine. Because I didn't know this, but Ukraine produces about 1/5 of the world's food. And most of that goes to the third world. And it would be bad PR for the expansion of communism in the third world to have those people starve to death because Russia was fighting with Ukraine. So this is a political move. It's not a softening, but I guess a realization by me to you that the scary Russian communists are now caught up in the world game that they have to start playing politics. They don't want to look bad. The Nord Stream pipeline, which provides the gas for Germany, especially this winter, is annually shut down for maintenance for 10 days. And they did that, and the world said, ooh, you're cutting Germany off. You're being bad. And then Canada was fixing the pumps that do that, and Canada was going to ship them back, and everyone said, oh, Canada, you're bad, you're helping out with the Russians. And the actual way to look at that is we in Canada are sure that this will end fairly soon, so the pipeline needs to be working. So that was actually a message of hope, and not that Trudeau is some kind of crazy person. We also have the Candu nuclear reactors in India. We were the first Western country to sell the electrically producing nuclear reactor to third world countries. And one hasn't blown up yet. So that's interesting that Russia would do that. I saw the film of that, and they actually never sat on the same table, and they didn't even look at each other. But the president of Belarus brokeraged this, and he's been pushing the war. And then because of the realization of what the sanctions are doing to Russia and that bad PR for communism, he said this war needs to stop. We need to find another solution. And suddenly they're at the table, they're letting the food go through, and the northern pipeline is opened up, so the Russians are not going to make the Germans freeze in the dark. So this is some hope that things may, instead of heading into World War III, bang, 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 into like squeezing, negotiating, we're not going to look bad. The Russians saying now we just want that little area, the Donbass and some other area, and they are issuing Russian passports to those who want them, and they're talking referendum. So hopefully the world is so intertwined that there's going to be a realization that we can't use last century's politics, which is what they're calling this stuff, to operate now. China has all this fantastic manufacturing capability, but they bought the machines to do that from Germany, and the repair parts come from Germany. So they're dependent on Germany. Everything in the U.S. is made in China. I spent a year trying to not buy anything made in China just to see if it was possible, and it wasn't. Even my toilet plunger is made in China. So lessons learned. We can't just say no to China, because everything we need comes from there, and for the U.S. to amp up their manufacturing to cover that gap requires time and entrepreneurs, not communists. Entrepreneurs smart enough to pull that off and savvy enough to get the finance for it. And the world in general seems to have been depending on the U.S. military to be the big brother and sort of keep a lid on things. And now the U.S. has their own problems. So that's gone. So NATO, all those European countries now have to look at the Russian bear and them in a circle. So the other thing that concerns me is in all of the countries now, people complain about the leader. He's an idiot, he's corrupt, he's this, he's that, he's in bed with the New World Order, he's puts his slippers under the wrong side of the bed for 2 to 4 years, and then when the election comes, they get reelected. Why is that? Where's the new young blood? We've got after the aftermath of that. Macron got back in, and the German Chancellor got back in, and the Dutch government's in complete disarray. Too many to mention, but all these people who are, he's acting like a dictator, he's a wacko, he's not for the people, gets elected. Why is that? So we have massive corruption from the very top to the very bottom. And this cannot be changed by force. That is part of what communism does. They try to come in and say, well, we're taking over the means of production, and entrepreneurs are bad, so the government will do everything, we'll just give you a check. That never works. And people don't want that. People want to do what they want to do with their lifetime. And the problem with a communist-run company is there's no entrepreneur, smart guy making it work. So their solution is, we'll throw more bodies at it, just to get more people. And at some point, you're going to run out of the I needed, wanted job people, and you're going to start having slaves. You are working here because we need you to usher in the utopia. And the reason this is happening at such intensity is, back to history, there's several planetary alignments that happen that destroy civilizations, and they are every 400 years. Saturn comes in, closest approach, and causes change of government. Usually there's famine and plague as well. Every 10,000 years, there's a planetary alignment. The 4 outer gas giants line up and affect the Earth in such a way as that you would call it end times. So the crusts burst, the tsunamis are rampant, miles high, the volcanoes go off, there are earthquakes, and the aftermath of all that is darkened skies for 2 to 10 years. So the crops can't grow, the temperatures goes down, the ice starts coming off to the north. It's famine. The animals die because there are no plants to eat. The people die because they live off the animals, and you're left with a remnant of humanity, numbering in whatever. And we rebuild. And because the destruction is so complete, there's no record. And this happens every 10,000 years. And at 20,000 years ago, according to geologists, that was when Noah's flood happened. And approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago, that's what happened to Egypt. That's why they're finding these cities, vast cities, underground. 20,000 people were living here. How did they do that? How did they carve the rock? What were they doing? They were escaping from the meteor showers that happen. Also, after having heard the man who specializes in that, went and looked back at the fires in California in May, around the 11th to 14th, accompanied with the Santa Ana winds, which do happen then. This is when we pass through the tail of Halley's Comet. So it's possible that small pieces, unnoticed pieces of that comet are hitting that area in California, and combined with the Santa Ana winds, and a third factor, there's the naphtha gas that's under the ground, or natural gas. If that gets up in an inversion and sits there, and then a fire starts, you get those firestorms that will melt a car and yet not set the house on fire next door. So this looks more like, a lot of people were saying this is the U.S. testing their particle beam weapons, but this is nature. And this gentleman, I can't remember his name, I'll post it down below. A lot of the historical huge fires, like the Chicago fire, for example, are on the same time dates as meteor storms. So this is part of the word apocalypse actually means the revelation of knowledge. It doesn't mean the end of the world. So just these facts of the 10,000 year cycles of disaster. This is why we don't have any history. And the only thing that survives is stone, like the pyramids. And the reason that was done is they know that that's the only thing that will survive. And the mathematical science and astrological knowledge encoded in the pyramid and other artifacts of that nature are as good to within 2 or 3 seconds of our science today. So they didn't actually pass on science, but they passed on, we've been here before and we can get to this level. There's more to the history of man than is apparent. For example, in one place in Egypt, and this is a place that's absolutely a mess, they're not even trying to put it back together, is a symbol. And it's burned into the rock 3D, and it's not actually burned, they don't know how they did it, but it's on the surface, it's on the backside, it goes all the way through. And this is technology of free energy. And the only other place in the world you will see that is in the Forbidden City. There's a lion with its paw on a globe, and the globe is embossed with the technology of free energy. Interesting. Well, the main problem with having a robust civilization with billions of people is energy and good stewardship of the planet like a garden. And using what is known or is knowable. There's all this information you can get off of YouTube or what's that called? That thing called they hide this information in books. And books are in libraries, and they're sometimes that thick. Sometimes it takes 3 weeks to read them. For example, I read a book this thick once on geology, and one of the things they talked about was at where the Straits of Gibraltar. I'm going to say are because it goes down both sides with this one opening. Maybe is. There's Gibraltar. Every 1,000 years or so there's an earthquake and that closes up. And it takes 1,000 years for all that seawater to dry up, and then you have this huge plain of land. And in the past, Northern Africa was green, so people from Northern Africa moved in there and farmed, and the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians. And then another earthquake, that opens up and the water comes rushing in, and it takes not too long, actually, for that to refill. So you'll have the Atlantic Ocean draining a little bit into the Mediterranean, and all those people get drowned. There are cities there under the water. This could be taught in grade 6 geography. But not. Now, I've spent my life finding this stuff out, and I think in 2010 I started making videos to get this information out to the world, believing that the more people that know this, the less crazy it will be, although the people we need to reach are spiritually asleep and practically physically asleep. Behind the Christian religion is the Eastern religions. They talk about higher consciousness. And everyone has the potential for that, and very few people seek it, very few people are it, very few people want it. And that is the level of mankind, the sleeping machine. And the hope of those who are awake is to awaken more people so we could have a rule of spiritual ethics instead of the barbarism that we try to disguise as civilization. So in the last 10,000 years, we've come out of the barbarism into tribalism, into empires, like the Persian Empire, for example, or the Roman Empire. The end of barbarism, the beginning of barbarism is, even the Vikings, they were barbarians. They built houses, they raised livestock, they raised crops. And then kingdoms, feudalism, and then in 1642-43, the first parliament was able to convict a king of murder and execute him. That happened in England. And that scared the hell out of the kings. They went, oh, this new system, they're actually able to kill us, so we got to change things. So the royals disappeared, and paper money came into existence at the same time as a means to control us. rather than royal decree. And where we are now, I think, is we have supposedly a nation state run by elected representatives, but the elected representatives are controlled by the black nobility, which is that ancient royalty and money still there. And that goes back to the British Empire, it goes back to the Roman Empire, it goes back to the Egyptians, and before that, I personally don't know. There seems to have been an era where the race that had red hair, freckles, blue eyes, was in charge of the entire planet. And they're finding skeletons of these people all over the world, and they were not popular. As far as, this is probably why the prejudice against gingers. And as far as a physiological, psychological type, the redheads are the human warriors, like the warrior ants. So it might have been a very militaristic, harsh government, which wouldn't go over well with everyone. Well, I'm going to stop. Food for thought. Start thinking.